Business owners likely will have only one shot to sell a business. Most don't understand what drives value and how buyers look at a business. Until now. Welcome to the How to Sell a Business podcast, where every week we talk to the subject matter experts, advisors, and those around the deal table about how to sell at maximum value. Every business will go to sell one day. It's only a matter of when. We're glad you're here. The podcast starts now.
Today I had the opportunity to interview Tom Britt of the TownePost network. And for two reasons. One, I have seen Tom, throughout pretty much throughout my career. He has been in the publishing and tech world here in the local community. And one of the big things that I saw with him is he created this community newspaper called the TownePost Network. And I guess I have to admit, I was surprised that a print publication had lasted so long. And then recently I saw that Tom had sold his own two locations that were his original babies. And so I saw that on LinkedIn and I reached out to him and I wanted to ask him how, as a seller, how did it work? And then as a franchisee, where does the business create value and how do other franchisees exit well? And as always, Tom was super generous with his time and with his information on it. And he certainly is seeing where the puck is going in this publishing-esque type industry. And I think he's onto something. So I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Tom Britt of the TownePost Network. Tom, welcome to the show. How are you?
Hey, thanks for having me, buddy.
So before you came on, I gave a high level overview of you and I've known you for a long time. So I guess where I'd like to start is a little background about you, how you got into TownePost and what you're doing over there.
Yeah, so a little background. I started out in publishing back in the late 80s. So this is back when desktop publishing was coming around and
the good old days.
The good old waxer days. You had waxers that put galley type and things together. And my first job out of Ball State, out of college, was working at a typesetting company, which are now extinct. But that was my first experience, introduction into publishing. I worked on magazines at Weimar Typesetting, which is now gone, and just fell in love with magazines. About 6 years later, so about 1993, I started my own pre-press company doing magazine design and things. It was called Progressive Publishing. And that business was interesting because it was all about desktop publishing. So democratizing the whole pre-press industry and how magazines were designed. Scanners were new, high-end printers were new. And so I was just taking advantage and riding that wave, but trying to develop processes and ways we could handle multiple pages for multiple clients. And then in 1995, they kept talking about this thing called the internet. We go on an airplane, it would be an AOL disk sitting in my seat. And I was like, what the heck is this? So the more I read about it, the more I heard about it, the more I got on the internet and started just browsing around back in the early days. The talk was about how it was going to do away with print. And here I am in a company that is in the print industry, right?
Right.
And so I thought, well, how could we leverage this thing called the interweb? And we started building websites, and we actually built the first e-commerce site in Indiana. It was a dog supply company. According to iQuest, it was the first e-commerce site in the state of Indiana. And it was so antiquated that when the customer, the guy that owned the company we built the site for, he didn't have internet, but he had a fax machine. So we had to actually fax him orders online so he could fulfill them and send them out. So anyway, long story short, I built one site like that, and I was like, this is a lot of work. There's no off-the-shelf stuff. We got to figure out a business model to actually monetize this some other way. So we came up with channelseek.com, and channelseek was the .com that was really becoming the open source guide of what's being streamed online. So back then, Real Player was the first, but it was the only one at the time that could stream video and audio over the internet. Use compression on each end and have a Real Player download. And Mark Cuban had just filed his S1 to go public with broadcast.com. And so I thought, man, there's going to be a need for a TV guide of all this stuff because all this videos out there, nobody has a guide that has everybody's stuff. And that's what ChannelSeek was. In the process of doing ChannelSeek, I still own my pre-press publishing company. So I had an office in Castleton on New Road. And in one part of the building was ProPub, the publishing company. Right. And then across the hall was our .com company. So we had two separate offices, two sets of payroll. I had an office in the ChannelSeek side because I had more room to grow. And in the process of doing ChannelSeek and starting to speak at conferences about convergence and internet, television, radio all converging, right? I had a publishing company, and I knew in the back of my head that print would be a big player in this at some point. And so we started building broadband portals for like Sprint and ISP Channel on the West Coast and Cello in Europe. AOL Time Warner had our ChannelSeek guides. So we were building these broadband portals with Comcast, all these guys. And I saw a need for a local portal. I thought that the internet would get more and more localized as more and more content came out there. I saw print as being a vehicle that would stimulate people to go online and maybe make purchases, or people would trust print more than they did the internet even back then. And so that we use leverage print to get people to do things online. That's how that whole system would work. Right. And so in 2000, I sold the publishing company and the .com and started consulting. And I thought, I should build my own local portal. I mean, I could do that. Sure. It's not that hard. It actually was harder than I thought, but
always is.
I built at Geist.com because that's where I live. And I'll just prototype it in my backyard and just see how it goes. And I launched it in 2003, just a website. And about 9 months later, I started the magazine. And so my traffic to my website was fairly consistent. I would have, I don't know, maybe 500 to 1,000 unique visitors per week. But when I started the magazine, that's when the whole script flipped, because the magazine was something people got in their mailbox. It had the name of Geist at the top. I live in Geist. I want to read what's happening in this Geist magazine. And that's when everything started to launch for us. So TownePost really started, the embryo started back in 2003, 2004. But it wasn't until 2010 we started licensing what we were doing. Because remember, my background was publishing in the system in the back office. So I kind of brought that to, how could we do more magazines? How can I get Ed to be a Tom Britt in his community? And how can I help someone else be the Tom Britt in their community? And so we started licensing what we were doing. And in 2012, we decided, at the time we had like 8 licenses going. And we decided, let's turn this into a franchise. It's more equitable for our people in the system. Right. It's more regulated. It's easier to sell down the road. Not only franchisees, but franchisor down the road. And so we made the leap, hired a great local attorney named Josh Brown, who's arguably the best franchise attorney, I think, in the Midwest.
He's been on the podcast. There's no one better.
There is nobody better than Josh. And he was just really, he was a pup back then. I say a pup, but he was getting started to specialize in franchising. Yeah. And we were one of his first clients that really just said, hey, convert us. And it took us a couple of years, but in 2016 we converted. We registered as a franchise. We converted everybody over to franchises. And now the TownePost network is 18 magazines in 18 different communities. Nice. We have 11 franchisees. And I just recently sold my 2 franchises. I started with my Geist and Fisher's one I'd done for 19 years. I just recently sold those to 2 new franchisees. Allison Gatz and Justin Beal. And now I'm the franchisor, so I can focus on just franchise development. But that's kind of the long story of how I got to where I'm at today. But it all started back in those .com days. the wild, wild west of the .com.
Well, I've had you on the short list, and I've been wrestling with the questions, because as we were talking about before we hit record, you think about a paper and you wonder, with the internet and email newsletters and so on and so forth, what's the viability of this? And so I struggled with, how am I going to come up with the questions, because I'm sitting here going, is there value here? And then all of a sudden I see you're selling, I continue to see the press releases about adding new franchisees. Then I see that you sold the ones that I knew you from. Mm-hmm. And so I'm like, well, there's got to be something more here. So I guess that's where I want to talk to you about, is how does the value, I guess, initially converge with print and digital in today's world?
That's a loaded question.
It always is.
I'll answer it maybe in a couple different ways, and maybe the course of the conversation will help answer that question. First of all, just our print magazines. And I look at gross revenue year over year and the same number of magazines each year. So if they started mid-year, I don't even count the revenue. I wait till the next year and we roll them in. Yeah. But just year over year, we've had consistently over the last 5 years, over 20% growth every year, year over year for 5 years straight. That's including COVID years. That's not exempting them. That's including the COVID years. Okay. And that's just print. Right. On top of that, we have added more digital services. We're now building websites. We're doing SEO for folks. We're doing programmatic advertising, Google advertising management, local SEO. We're doing a lot of digital services, and that's over and above the print stuff that's already growing year over year exponentially. So financially, it is viable. I think what makes us different and what's really helped us is this, my prism that I look at things from, right? So I don't see print as the end all solution to everything. I don't walk into a sales call and say, what size ad do you want? Usually that's the last thing I ask, right? Yeah. Like, I would never come to your office and say, Ed, hey, let's get the pleasantries out of the way. Okay, what size ad you thinking about this month? Because really the size of the ad has very little to do with the success of your marketing campaign. It has more to do with all the other things you're doing digitally, socially, other things you're involved in, your own client retention programs. Those things all play into how successful you are. So what we do is we come in and we're more like marketing consultants. We're trying to figure out, we play in a sandbox. Where is everything? Where's everything buried in the sandbox? And what do we work with? What's worked in the past? Are you using QR codes? Are you using couponing? Do you have an app you're trying to get people down? What's the outcome? What's the measurement of success here? And because of that, I think it's helped us with our print sales, just because we're not looking to just print more paper. We're trying to be more efficient with our paper and then leverage your other assets to make all this stuff work together. And honestly, if you look at it, printing magazines or even newspapers or anything, printing them, the process of designing them, putting them on rolls of paper, cutting them out, stitching them, putting them in the mail, paying the postage. It's expensive, it's labor intensive, and it's a very high barrier to get into that business. But it also gets the second highest response and retention amongst all advertising mediums, second only to billboards. So if we can do that well and then help them on everything else and make them all sing together, then we can help the client be successful. And it must be working, because they wouldn't keep working with us if it didn't work.
No, 100%. And that kind of makes sense to me, where I don't mean kind of, it makes sense to me from the standpoint of, okay, not only do we have this publication, but we also have all of the wraparound services that's going to maximize the value surrounding the paper itself, right?
Right.
Did I get there?
Right.
So, well, one of the things I guess I wanted to ask, is from an avatar standpoint, the people that are getting the newspaper, like from where we sit, there are people that we're sent, we're constantly sending, different, stuff to, and so many people prefer getting paper, prefer the envelope. I can't tell you how many people we've talked to that pull out a file of all of the collateral stuff that we've sent out over the years, and they just keep it. And so I know that there's those kinds of people. But what surprises me is, and that's where I was going to ask, what's the avatar of that reader for the paper?
Right. So the avatar is actually kind of surprising. There's been a lot of research done. There's a National Magazine Association, which coincidentally is run by all the big magazine publishing companies. Okay, so imagine that. But so you have to kind of take what they say with a little grain of salt. But surprisingly, it's my generation. So it's the 50, 60, 70-year-olds. But also the younger people now are starting to adopt print more so than even the generation that came before them. And so when we look at the avatar, it's a homeowner. So we only mail to homeowners.
Yep.
And it's business owners in these local communities. And so if you own a home, like I live in Fishers, when I get the Fishers magazine and it has Fishers at the top and it's got a picture of somebody on the front that I probably need to know who they are, and I start scrolling through those ads, it becomes very obvious that I am engaged in that. I can't text and read a magazine. I can't watch television and read a magazine. So I can't multitask.
Good point.
And it's also some nice downtime from my screen. So that's why people like print publications. It is something they don't have to scroll on their iPad or Kindle or something to read. Right. So I think it's people who, I think digital and the oversaturation of digital in all of our lives is actually making print a little more unique and a little more special because you don't get as much of it as you used to get. Yeah. But secondly, it's a much more intimate conversation with somebody in a print publication than it is on something you're going to see online. Yeah. People will remember and reflect and take action on something they've seen in a magazine 10 times more often than they would on something they've only seen online. Really? Just because if it's tangible, it must be real, right?
Yeah. No, I get that.
So I think it works.
Well, and it's funny you say that because I was sitting there thinking about I was thinking about it wrong, actually, because for someone to be 10 times more likely to take action. That's surprising because one of my next questions were, look, you're competing, you got your Facebook groups, you've got Nextdoor, you've got all these, community, whatever, online groups. And I'm sitting here going, well, that has to detract from the value. But when in fact, I think it does just the opposite, that people are going to the magazine and it actually amplifies rather than detracts. So
yeah, it does make sense. And the way I like to say that, another way of saying it is that people like to have things curated for them and packaged and presented in a nice way.
Yeah.
It's like, for example, and here locally, I'll use an example, Angela Buckman, who was a weather person, meteorologist on a local television station. I have an app on my phone called WeatherBug, okay? I can see the weather instantaneously at any time of the day and night. I can get current temperature, dew point, sunset, sunrise, moon, all that stuff, right?
Yep.
But I will sit and listen to Angela Buckman curate the weather for me and package it differently than my weather app, and I sit and I enjoy that. Now, why do I like that? It's because it's intent. It's intentional curation of content. And we're doing nothing different in print. We're finding stories. We're getting stories about local businesses coming to town, a new restaurant that just opened up, a brewery that's going to open here in the yard. All of a sudden, we go interview them. We get pictures. We kind of tell their story in 400 to 500 words. We put it on social media. We put it in the magazine. people enjoy ingesting curated content that was designed specifically just for them. And I don't think that's ever going to go away. And actually, I would argue that because there is so much, all this other data out there, you mentioned Nextdoor, Facebook, all these groups, that people like to stop every once in a while and say, okay, just curate something for me and entertain me for a minute. I'm done.
100%. And I get that. And that's kind of where my next question is I hear that. And if I'm looking at buying this type of business, I'm going, oh, geez, who writes these stories? How do I deliver a product that, no one wants to read an article full of typos. No one wants to, read a grammatically inferior piece of content. So I guess that's the first thing is, what if you talk about the personnel structure, how does that work? Now, that's my first question, but coupled with it is I think we're seeing that the creative community is only increasing. I think there's more people available to write your articles than some of the restaurants and some of the people, the businesses that are facing, trying to hire people. So that's my question is, so tell me about how personnel works in this type of business.
It's a great question. And actually, it's probably one of our strengths of our network and the way TownePost is set up. We are a true turnkey franchise, which means that, let's say Ed buys a franchise and he wants to do a magazine in Timbuktu.
Okay.
Well, Ed comes in and gets trained on our cloud-based system. We train you on how to onboard freelance writers and photographers. We actually take care of helping you get them into the system so you can make them assignments. We already have our own designers on staff. We've got our own editors on staff, our own web people on staff that make all the web updates. We even do social media on anything that you put in your magazine goes through our whole turnkey system. So Ed and the franchisee is the salesperson. They're the mayor. They're the face of that community. And so their job is to go out and do the networking, do the sales, find out what stories need to be written, and then assign it in the system and let our writers, photographers do that. And we even go as far as to actually do all your invoicing for you. So when your magazine's ready to go, we do the invoicing for you. We collect all your payments for you. We pay all your bills, including printing, postage, writers, photographers, everybody. And then what we do is once a month, we net out to you how much you made based on your collections and what you sold and what we had to spend on your behalf for the previous month. So it's a complete turnkey system. So when you say personnel, it's really just you. We have a couple franchisees that do have a spouse that assists them. One in Northern Indiana, his spouse and he are basically partners. He's the sales guy and she does all the operations side, getting things in our system and assigning writers and photographers. They work really well as a tag team. But most of our franchisees are just solo entrepreneurs. They work from home. Their wife or husband does something else. And with our back office, we provide all the systems and people the support they need. So they're not really hiring anybody. I always tell people it's just you and your home office and a laptop and you will be just fine. So that's kind of how the personnel works. It is a true turnkey franchise system.
Right. No,
you don't have to hire anybody. We've already got them on staff, and you just pay your production fees, and that's it.
But I think isn't the industry as a whole going that way? That they're they are freelancing. I know Forbes does it. Where they're looking for contributors, and then they compile all this together, and that's how they do it. The difference in yours is you're selling the mechanics of the financial side is advertising, right?
Right. And to your point, there are a lot of publications out there who have moved to this model, whether they had to or they just financially couldn't keep supporting full-time writers and photographers anymore. We started out that way. We try to stay as lean as possible, and our system is developed so that we can onboard freelancers that maybe write one story a month. We've had some that write 10 or 12 stories a month across our whole network. Yeah. The nice thing about writing is you can do a phone interview and you could be anywhere when you do the interview.
Right.
On a phone or Zoom or whatever.
Just like us right now.
Exactly. I don't even know where you're at. I don't care, right? Because we're having this conversation and I can do that interview. So, we've leveraged that for the existence of our model. During COVID, obviously, that we were already developed and designed that way. So COVID was easy for us to get through. The only hard part for us is we had a new office in Fishers we just moved into. Okay. And our staff was all excited to have, we have a community pool where we're at, and we have a parking garage in downtown. We're right across the street from a brewery. It's like, this is living life for a youngster, and COVID shutdown made us all go home. But, everything's already in the cloud. So we just worked from home in the cloud. It was really just no different. We just missed out on the social aspect of it.
Yeah. So when you think about, who are the buyers of this type of business, and what are they looking for? I assume it's, the backdrop of every entrepreneur is freedom, the freedom to do everything. But besides that, there has to be more, and there has to be. And I know that you have looked at, all kinds of different buyers. And I know you have a horror story to share with us on the institutional side, but I mean, what is there any consistency? So if I own, a paper of some sort, what do I look for in that type of buyer?
So we have a couple, I guess, kind of buyer profiles. So, and so let's look at one, and that would be more of like a new franchise territory. So Ed wants to do Timbuktu.com or Timbuktu magazine, and there is no Timbuktu magazine. He's going to start it from scratch, and we're going to get this thing trained, get him off the ground, and launch his first magazine in 4 months. That buyer profile is generally somebody in their late 40s, early 50s. They have a lot of B2B sales experience. Not necessarily magazine or even print or even, radio or television media, but just good B2B sales ethics and tactics. One of our top sales reps for a couple of years, or top franchisees, was in pharmaceutical sales. And so, they're used to cold calling and trying to get appointments, and then trying to go in and close them on the appointment and walk out and build the relationship with that client. So people that are really good salespeople, they have enough experience where they feel confident in their capabilities. They don't have trouble getting in front of anybody and talking about their business and asking about how they're doing, and developing that relationship. Those people are really good candidates for us, because what we can offer them is a turnkey franchise system that they're going to own their territory. They're going to own their magazine. Yeah. And the only thing we get out of it when they sell it down the road is $10,000 to transfer it to somebody else, but they keep the net proceeds of that franchise territory. So if you work for yourself, if you want to work for yourself, have a little more flexibility, have a quality of life, be able to work from home, be closer to your kids, your family. Maybe you're a sales rep that's been on the road a lot and you're just tired of traveling. You just want to do something in your backyard. This is a great profile for you. The second profile, the second type of purchase would be somebody who is looking to buy an existing territory. Yeah. So the ones that I just sold were existing territories. They weren't corporate owned because we owned them separately from TownePost, but they were original too. Those profiles, one of them was in real estate, and the other one had been the executive director of a startup nonprofit that was founded here in the city that she bought. Okay. And I think, nonprofit, you're selling sponsorships, you're working with sponsors, you're trying to do a lot with not a lot of people and not a lot of resources. Really good networking. On the real estate side, again, networking, working your contacts, staying in touch with people, follow-ups, being there when they're ready to sell that after 5 years, after you sold them the house 5 years ago. So
Yeah.
I think a person buying a territory, we've got a couple other territories kind of in play a little bit that people are talking about wanting to maybe sell, or some buyers trying to inquire about if they'd be willing to sell. But they all kind of fit that persona. They're that 45 to 50-year-old, got some experience under the belt, and they're ready to own something of their own and spend the next 10 years building something they can exit on someday.
And that brings us to the next buyer that comes through the door. So the next buyer says, okay, what am I buying? And in your case, you guys are a little bit different. I know you well enough to, like, good organization. No one in this community sweats that. But if I'm looking at this, I'm saying, all right, what am I buying? Because you control the process, you control all the people, you control whether I live or die, right? So if I'm selling something, now I've got personal relationships with all these people in the community. Now I'm almost like like my doctor that just retired. He has all this personal goodwill with all these people. How do I get it to the next person? So I guess that's what I wanted to kind of bring around is, all right, I see the value of the earning stream of what you're selling. I just worry about it from a risk standpoint if I'm the new buyer. So how does that work?
So a new buyer meaning like the current territories I just sold.
Right.
Okay. So in that example, what they bought were the existing contracts that we already have. So most advertisers, we're a monthly magazine.
Okay.
Most advertisers are doing more than 1 month a year. They do 12 months a year, 6 months a year.
Okay.
Most of those were contracts that we've had for multiple years. In Geist, for example, where I started, I had 2 advertisers who had been with me since the very first issue I did in 2004. So
nice.
Who
are they? Who are they?
Yeah. But what they're buying is that name, that recognition that the community has with the brand in the community, but they're also buying relationships and companies that have committed to this for multiple years. And they're buying the fact that they're probably going to continue with those relationships going forward, as long as they're, they don't go and mess something up. They can go in and keep that going. And so that's kind of what they're buying. It's also, they're buying some, as with the existing territories, they're buying some assurances that this thing is going to be here for a while.
I totally get that. Yeah.
I mean, prep prices, paper, there's been lots of crises in printing. We all know about paper shortages, and there's a paper mill in Europe that shut down and during COVID, and it threw the whole thing in a tailspin during COVID. Right. And we survived all that. Now paper is coming back and the pricing is staying about the same, but it's going to go back down again. And so that stability in that market, we've weathered that already. We already weathered 2 recessions. Yeah. A pretty big one in 08, 09. So we've kind of weathered those storms, and we're still here, and we're still growing at a 20% clip every year. And I think that's what they're buying into is I want to do something that I own, but I also want to know I can do this for 10 years and maybe exit and make more money on it and still monetize it during that 10-year period.
Yeah. So what I heard is, look, you're buying recurring revenue. You're buying a dependence on the results that the paper itself gets you as part of this whole process. Mm-hmm. All right. And so if and we know who the buyer is. So now the buyer is between 45 and 55, ready to put the hammer down and make a good run for the next decade. So where do I find the money to buy, basically one ginormous intangible asset?
Well, so in the existing territories, they got their own financing lined up. They were able to use the financials and the historical data. We did get a valuation done by a professional company that does business valuations, and one of the industry's, at least the Midwest, leading valuation experts gave us a valuation. So based upon that valuation, taxes, history, the banks were very, it's a tough market, but they gave them the money for it.
Yeah.
When you're talking about new franchise territory, our new franchise rate is $35,000 per territory. That's the 2023 rate. That could go up if they're listening to this later. Most of those people they have that money kind of set aside.
Yeah.
I think our FDD asked them to have about 50,000 of liquid assets, including the 35 they're going to pay us, just to help them get through that first 3 to 4 months as cash flows pick up. But that's about what they need on the financial side.
So when you go to resell or to go through the resale process, and again, the avatar remains the same, or does the financial picture of that buyer change?
To resell a territory, so we've only had 4 territories resell.
Okay.
We had actually 5. 2 were corporate owned that we resold to new franchisees. My 2, and there was another territory that we had a franchisee who had some health issues that came upon him unexpectedly, and he did a sale to somebody who's already in our network. So somebody was already working with us, and they bought it, and they're now running that territory. I think if you had to look at an avatar or try to describe them, what we found so far, and this is 5 transactions over the last 7 years. Most of these buyers are people who live in these communities, and there are people that we already knew or already had some kind of relationship or knowledge of TownePost. So these are people who worked with us. One of them was an advertiser who'd worked with us and bought ads, ended up buying a territory. One was a photographer who had done some freelance work for us, owned his own photography studio, but just really had a passion for the territory that he was photographing and said, well, what would it cost if I just bought this? And so they're usually people that we know. Now, as we get bigger, we got 18 now, we got a couple on the horizon, but if we have, 50 to 100 franchises, I'm sure that's going to change a bit, because then the brand's going to carry a little more swagger, and you're going to have a little broader net. And you probably would get more institutional type buyers. So people coming through brokerages or some kind of a middle person, that would be probably more apropos. But right now we're just kind of dealing in Indiana and Kentucky. It's very contained, and those buyers are right in our backyard. We're probably mailing to them now.
I get it. In fact, that's funny you say that, because there was a recent study that, businesses, I want to say it's 600,000 in revenue and below. No, I take that back. It's $1 million in revenue and below. The buyer is within 10 miles of that business, 10 or 20 miles. So you're right. I mean, regardless of, and in this, and the study that I'm quoting, I mean, we're talking, industry agnostic. That's that way, just based on revenue.
And I'll tell you a funny story about selling Geist and Fishers, the 2 I just sold. I put a listing on Biz Buy Sell myself. I wrote it. Yeah. We had the valuation done. We knew what we wanted to put and what we wanted to ask for. We put on bizbuysell.com, which, if you don't know, that's a national website. You can list companies to sell, and you also can go on there and buy companies on there. The listing I put on there was a 90-day listing. I did not want to renew it. I thought I'm going to give it 90 days and to see what happens. So I listed on Biz Buy Sell. 2 weeks into it, no one inquired about it at all. So then the 3rd week, I put a listing. I shared the listing on my LinkedIn profile, thinking that other business people on LinkedIn might see it and inquire about it. I got several people that messaged me that said, hey, I can't afford to buy it, but I'd love to work for you. I want to write for you, or I could do sales for you if you want to decide to keep them. So I had a lot of interest, but they weren't buyers. They were just like people who were interested in maybe helping out, which is great. That went on for a couple weeks, and really nothing came out of it. Finally, the beginning of week 5, I shared it on my Facebook profile. Now on Facebook, I've got about 5,000 friends, right?
All
of them are friends. We're all Christmas cards, 5,000 every year. I put on Facebook, And literally within 3 days, I had 4 people wanting to buy the magazines in 3 days. Now, the reason I tell you that is because we started on the process and some new people came in, some other people kind of opted out. This went on for about a month, but I closed on Fisher's, and I closed the day before my 90-day listing was expired. So not only did I sell them and list them on Biz Buy Sell, but actually it was Facebook that actually sold them. And not only did I get them sold, but I had them closed all within that 90-day period.
That's awesome. And good for you. I mean, as we've talked, I mean, in our world, it tends to be closer to a year to get that done. And
I expected that, to be honest with you.
But good on you. And, it's funny, I had an expert about selling health clubs, and one of his techniques is that he looked at who comes to the gyms the most. All right. The hardcore people. And he sends him a letter and says, look, this thing's going great. I'm looking at perhaps taking on an investor. Would you be interested in? Yeah. And that was his hook. And that's how he got these people. He's like, yeah, you know what? Have you ever thought about owning your own? Oh, absolutely. And that's how he did it. And good for him. So that,
I think people that are closer to it are the best, and most obvious candidates to buy. As we start growing and we start going national, we are licensed in 42 states right now. We're looking to go beyond Indiana, Kentucky. We're getting ready to launch Florida here this fall. Nice. With our first one in Florida. So as we start expanding, that avatar is going to change, and we're going to try to, that's kind of the $1 million question is, what's the perfect candidate? What are they doing now? What's their profile? Right. Yeah. And if we can find more people like them and sell more franchises, that makes TownePost even more successful.
Yeah, I agree. Well, I'm bumping up on time, and I want to be sensitive to the time I promised you. So I'm curious to know, as you move forward, I one of the things I really appreciate about you is that you are thinking about value. You are thinking about exits. You're a business owner, and you're doing the same for your franchisees. So I guess that's where I'm looking to you to explain to me on the value I know you're pitching an earning stream, but there has to be a saleable asset at the end of whoever's ownership journey. And I guess I just want to talk a little bit about how are you positioning those franchisees that they have a saleable asset? You know what I mean?
Yeah. So there's really 2 things that we can do to impact their sale price, right? So one is develop strong systems and training systems so that a potential buyer down the road feels comfortable that when they buy this asset from one of our franchisees, that Tom and TownePost is going to be there to take care of them in perpetuity. Yep. So that's one piece of it. The second piece is building a strong TownePost brand that people want to feel like they want to be a part of. McDonald's doesn't sell hamburgers. They sell their brand, right? Yep. TownePost wants to be able to sell that brand to people, say, no, these guys get to work from home. I see them in the golf tournaments. They have a great quality of life. They're making great money, but they love what they're doing, and they're building value in something that is going to be worth something down the road when we're ready to exit. So those are really the only 2 levers that we can control. And those are some things that we are spending a lot of time on as we speak. I mean, one of the reasons I sold the 2 franchises I had was to spend more time on getting TownePost systems in place, getting training better and more memorialized, so I can run you through a script and how to do this versus having to do so much one-on-one training with everybody. So that's what they're buying into. And I'm hoping as we go down that path, we're going to find more people that just want to join TownePost that are already doing magazines. I mean, if you think about it, if you were doing Timbuktu magazine out of your house right now on your own, you're negotiating your printing. You're one guy buying printing from your printer. You're the last guy the printer wants to hear from that month, and you're going to pay more, believe me. You probably have an in-law doing the editing. You got your nephew or your son doing the website. You got somebody else doing social media. You're trying to do sales, but you're also have to do the billing yourself in QuickBooks. And people are behind, but you're so busy trying to bill, you can't catch up on the receivables. It's hard. It's very hard. It's a very lonely business. So what we're doing now is we're actually talking to a lot of people who are in that situation that want to just become one of our franchisees. And basically we convert them into a TownePost franchisee. And now they not only know our systems, we take care of all their back office for them. So their nephew or their neighbor can now go do something else.
Right.
But we also give them economies of scale. We also give them a better exit, because who wouldn't rather buy a franchise of Timbuktu magazine from TownePost than a magazine from Ed called Timbuktu? And Ed wants to go to Florida, and he's not here to answer my questions because he's in Florida now.
I got it. Well, that's
kind of the one that we're actually talking. We've got a couple magazines we're in discussions with now. There's a whole vein of these types of publications out there, and we're just starting to make headway now. But I'm hoping by the end of the year, we'll have a couple announcements about a couple that we're onboarding in some other states that we can convert into franchises.
Well, I always believe, growth through acquisition is the quickest way to build brand. So that's awesome. Well, at the very end of every interview, I always ask, if you had one piece of advice to give listeners that would have the most immediate impact on their business and as it relates to an exit, what would it be?
The one thing I would recommend is just always having your hands and your mind around your numbers and keeping a close eye on the numbers that matter the most to a potential buyer down the road.
I see.
I think a lot of people, entrepreneur, I'm going to speak from an entrepreneur, because that's what I am. I built this business from nothing, and here we are, where we are today. In every entrepreneur's journey, you start out with this great idea, and then you try to do a proof of concept, and then you start monetizing it, and you think, oh my gosh, I think I can make this work. People will pay me money to do this idea. And then you go to the next stage. You start trying to grow and make more money by making the idea better and bigger and a broader footprint. And I think at some point in that journey, it usually happens after the fatigue starting to set in, because you start realizing it's harder to grow than you thought, or I'm starting to lose part of this market because somebody else started up and I got to pivot now and do something a little different. But at some point in that journey, you have to stop and say, you know what? I'm going to have to sell this someday. And nobody's going to buy this from me because I'm the center of it. I was the idea guy and I got it off the ground, but I can't get this plane above 10,000 feet. And nobody's going to buy a plane that only goes 10,000 feet tall. So when you start paying attention to numbers and start looking at your books and start looking at them from the eyes of not just how well you're doing, but what a potential buyer would look at those books as and say, I want to buy this. That's when you start really adding some value to your business. And you realize that you need to be detachable. If a business won't survive without you, you're in trouble. You have to make it survivable without you. You got to get systems in place, people in place that are key people, and you have to build it so that you can unplug yourself someday and go into somebody else's garage and work. And I think that's my only recommendation I would give to anybody. And to be honest with you, Ed, I'm in that position right now. I mean, now that I've got TownePost as my full-time gig and I'm focused on franchising and we got a digital thing we're spinning off. Now that I'm focused on that, this is my top of mind every day, is how am I going to build this for my exit someday?
Sure.
And you just have to be always thinking about, where's the back door on this thing? If you don't know where it's at, clear the clutter so you can find it, because you need to be able to do that at any given time. You just never know when the offer is going to come around either. I mean,
100%.
What I learned in my .com days, all these companies are out there killing it and going for things. And then I'd meet with them one day and the next day they'd sold out. And I'm like, what the hell happened? You never told me you're going to sell out. And, well, this guy approached me a week ago and made us an offer we couldn't refuse, You just never know.
And that's what we do. I mean, it's like, when we do valuation work, it's like, look, you never know when someone's going to show up at your doorstep with an offer. So understanding what creates value in your business, at least you're in a position to understand whether or not you need to take the next step and figure out who's going to come along and be your deal team.
Right.
Yes. So what's the best way we can connect with you?
Well, yeah. So, TownePost, TownePost.com is our public site. We also have a franchising site, franchising.townpost.com. Has more information about how the franchising process works, what territories are available, key areas we're looking at here in the Midwest. Those are the two best ways to get a hold of me. I also, my phone number is on those sites as well. So what I recommend for people to do, either text me and just say, hey, can you give me 30 minutes and just do a phone chat? I always tell people they're looking to buy a franchise, or maybe looking to buy one of our existing territories, or even looking to convert their franchise or their business into our franchise system. Is I'd much rather talk you out of it than talk you into it.
Amen to that.
So that'd be my recommendation, is reach out to me through text or email, and that'd be the best way. Got
it. Well, I'll have all of your contact information and all of the places that they can find you. Mm-hmm. So, Tom, hey, thanks so much for hanging out with me. It's been too long. It's been too long since we got to visit. So I'm glad.
Our paths finally crossed again. It's been great.
Right on. Well, I'm certain the listeners will have gotten a lot of value out of this. So I can't thank you enough.
I hope so. Yeah, you're welcome.
All right. We'll be seeing you soon.
All right, my man.
See you, Tom. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today on the How to Sell Your Business podcast. If you want more episodes packed with strategies to help sell your business for the maximum value, visit howtosellabusinesspodcast.com for tips and best practices to make your exit life-changing. Better yet, subscribe now so you never miss future episodes. This program is copyrighted by MISO Inc. All rights reserved.